Hello and welcome back to a new episode of the Ideal Wealth Grower YouTube channel. My name is Axel Meyerhöfer and I'm the founder of Ideal Wealth Grower and today's host. And for those of you who actually watch this channel on a regular basis, yes, the actual wonder, the unbelievable thing has happened. They have opened some of the stores in our area. So as you can see, I really still exist as a normal person. I got a haircut, I look normal again. So I'm glad, even though it's a little chilly in the back by now. So I'm glad that that was possible yesterday, just in time for Valentine's Day. So I'm glad to tell you about that. So today's video is going to be a little bit different than other videos that I've done in the past, in the sense that I want to follow a suggestion of a really good friend of mine who I've been in touch with and following and being very fond of for many years, and his name is Michael Gertz. He is known as kind of like the guru of storytelling, and one of the things that he recently brought up in one of his newsletters and videos is the fact that when we're actually thinking about how do we learn and how do we actually remember things, that for most of us it's much easier to remember a story, and most of us still remember the stories that we heard when we were little kids and our parents or grandparents or some teacher in school told us a story, rather than having to learn some stuff from a book or some statistics or some kind of values and statements and formulas and anything like that. So I thought, well, I haven't done this before, so I hope for those of you who feel this is not really quite the best way to go about it, please forgive me for this being the first time. But what I wanted to do, because it was also so appropriate and kind of happened just recently, is to tell you a little bit of a story that also attaches to the topics that we normally cover here at Ideal Wealth Grower. And also, normally I'm always doing this freehand, basically as it flows from my mind to my mouth. But this time I actually made some notes. And the story came together, or actually occurred about 10 days ago or so, because as those of you who also follow our website, if you go to the website and go type in idealwealthgrower.com/media, you will see that under the media tab, you will find all the different recordings and mainly podcasts that I've been invited to be a guest on. Mainly to talk about real estate investing, turnkey investing, our strategy, why out of state, all of those kind of things. And that has accumulated quite a bit. I think we probably at like 25 or 30 podcasts that you can see there. And so you go to the site, you click on any one of the ones that seem interesting, and it takes you directly to the recording of that episode. So you don't need to go through the whole library of somebody who has a podcast just to find the one that is the one that I was on. So in this whole aspect of providing our information to worldwide audiences through podcasts, many of the hosts, especially when they have a little bit bigger podcasts, they like to do what's called a pre-interview. What I learned from that is it has a couple of different purposes. One purpose is to make sure that the technology really works. Right? Like I, for example, have a USB microphone, I have a good camera, I have a good setup, I have a good background, all those kind of things, but I've been doing it dozens of times now. And it got a little better over time, but a lot of people don't have the right lighting, so you can barely see and stuff like that. So the hosts want to make sure that the technology is there, and if not, then they give some hints and tips on how to make it better. The second purpose is to say, find out, is the topic that the podcast is mainly for, and what the audience is actually expecting to hear about, in alignment what the guest has to present, right? So let's say you have a podcast like one that I have been on, that is a regional podcast talking about how can people that don't have a whole lot of money get into real estate investing. And there's a whole kinds of different ways, and one is the one that we are representing. That's our out-of-state turnkey residential real estate strategy, which literally says you don't need a whole lot of money, you just need to have a certain patience to accumulate and then invest, accumulate and then invest. So in that particular case, it was a good fit. But let's say you had that podcast and the guests were an expert in finances for business equipment, right? And yes, the equipment that goes into the properties that get renovated and stuff like that is business equipment, but financing that equipment is not really very closely related to a podcast about how can normal people get started into real estate investing. So that wouldn't be a good match. And in a pre-interview, you find out. And then the third thing, and I didn't even know that that was a thing, but it is, that sometimes people get a little flustered when they are on the camera or when they know that they're being interviewed, and they kind of lose their words, they lose the flow of speech, and they really struggle with giving answers. And most of the podcasts are only 20-30 minutes long, so what actually happens is that the host then kind of has to drag out the answers and keep the conversation flowing. And for somebody, especially when you're not seeing the people, you're just listening, it feels a little bit tough and hard to follow and so forth. So those are the three purposes. And so what happens, and why I actually made some notes and wanted to kind of make you participate in this experience that I had, is the story of Monique and myself going through this pre-podcast interview session, which was originally for those three purposes. And as you can imagine, very quickly, within like 3, 5, maybe 8 minutes, we had that all covered. I'm a blabbermouth anyway, so I rather have to try to be more concise than kind of being afraid to say something. I have all the technology, the background, all that stuff, and the topic made sense because I have a wonderful support through my assistant Nadine. She always makes sure that there's a good match between the topic of the podcast and what we have to cover. So that was out and done very quickly. So basically, when we got into this discussion with Monique, I am looking here at my notes. We started out and she said, okay, so tell me a little bit more about what is the strategy and what is different than what you do versus what other organizations in real estate or real estate investing actually do. And I explained a little bit about the out-of-state turnkey residential real estate strategy, and you can take a closer look at exactly what that is in one of our previous videos, because we had already done that. But one of the things that I keep stressing more and more, and I kind of came up with what I believe is my own term, or at least something that is not heard that often, and that is the time freedom point. And so Monique said, well, what is time freedom point? I heard about financial independence or economic independence. What is time freedom point? And I told her, hey, that is something similar. But the way I define it is basically the time freedom point as it applies to our strategy is the point in time in the future at which you make consistently enough passive income from your investments so that you no longer have to exchange time for money. Right? Most people, if you were to say, can you define what a job really is that to do something, or you have knowledge about something, and because you have that, a company or an employer gives you money for the time that you spend using that knowledge and experience for them. So you're exchanging your time for their money. And that is typically a job. And even in a small business, it applies because you're applying yourself and you're applying your time to make the business grow and make the business successful. So the time freedom point is the point in the future where you get enough passive income to no longer having to exchange time for money. And that then ultimately really is, in my way, in my thinking, in what I hope you to get out of this, one really important component of freedom. To have the actual freedom to decide what do you really want to do with your time, which, if you think about it, time is the most precious thing you have. You can't make more of it. Every one of us has the same 168 hours a week or a year or the lifetime. So time is not, you can't get more, you can't get less, you can't change it, it's just there. So then the question becomes, how do I use it most efficiently or to the most of my pleasure? And one of the ways to do that is when the vast majority of the day is no longer necessary to actually get enough money so you can actually cover the basics of life. And Monique says, so, okay, I get that. But when we're talking about the basics of life and how do we actually go about this, what are the things that I need to be able to do to get to this time freedom point? And how do you actually know where that is? So the first thing we addressed is, okay, so when and where is that time freedom point for you? And again, I made another video just specifically about that. But in a nutshell, it is individual for everyone. So if you, for example, say, I live in an area where I know if I had somehow every month coming into my bank account, $4,200 or more, I could pay for everything. I could pay for my house and for my car and for my food and for going out to restaurants and the sports and any of the things that you want to do typically. And maybe even a few things that you might want to do but currently don't do. You would know, okay, $4,200 is enough for you. In my area, it might be $7,500. In your area, it might be $3,500. In another area, it may be $4,500. So whatever the number is, let's just say it would be $4,200. And then you have to say, okay, so now I know this number and I want to apply the strategy that Ideal Wealth Grower says. And I said to Monique, so just imagine you knew that each house that you invest in, that you own from applying our strategy would give you $400 a month. And like I said, watch the other video to how do you calculate to the $300 or $200 or $400 a month. So let's just say it would be $400 a month, and you want to get to $4,200 a month to your time freedom point, right? So that would be right around 10 or 11 houses, at least when you look at it today. If you had the money and you could buy 10 houses and each would give you $400 a month, you would make $4,000. Now the reality that you most of the time don't buy 10 at a time. You buy one and then next year maybe another one, and 15 months later another one, and so forth. So you buy your 10 over time, and that way you get to your 4,000 or 4,200 plus per month in passive income. And now you have to ask yourself, okay, so how do I get there? And the quick calculation is, if you could put $2,000 aside every month, and it takes you $20,000 to buy one of those houses, then it's every 10 months you could buy one. Right? And so if you say, okay, every 10 months on average I can buy one and I need 10, right? So that's 100 months, and you divide that into years, and then you know with 12 months, that's about 8 years. In 8 years, you will have bought the 10 houses, right? So then you can reach your time freedom point in 8 years, maybe 9 years, maybe 7 years, depending if you can actually do it. Now, most people will say $2,000 a month is way too much. Okay, that's fine. You know, I totally understand that. And if it's too much, then maybe you say it's $1,000 a month. Well, then it takes you 20 months for the first one and a little less from there. So let's say the total is not 100 months, but it's more like 150 months, right? So that's then maybe 13 years or 14 years. So your time freedom point would be in 13 or 14 years if you get exactly $400 forever. Now, the reality is, there are a bunch of variables, and you would really have to sit down and do a little spreadsheet, and I could show you how that really comes out. In most cases, it's way less than it initially looks like, for a number of reasons that I could explain to you. But fundamentally, you can figure out, even if you know nothing, you know, okay, where do I want to go? How much do I get per house? How many houses do I need to get? And then just add up the time, and you know this is the point in time when I'm going to be at that point. So Monique said, okay, that sounds good, but if that is so fundamentally easy, I pick a number, I figure out how long it's going to take to get there. What is really the hard thing? Why are not so much more people doing that, or why people that may even have start struggling with? And so what we came to discuss are 3 really fundamental points, and those are discipline, patience, and structure or systems. And all 3 need to be there to really make it work. So there's in a sense of discipline, when you think about discipline, what is really important about discipline is to ask yourself, if I had, let's say, unexpectedly extra money coming in, right? Somebody were to say, okay, you live here, I have somebody that I need to have some time looked after, I need to travel more in my new job or something like that. Could you go over next door once in the morning before you go to work and once in the evening after you come back to work, just to look that everything is okay? And I give you $50 per day for that. And you only need to do it during the weekdays. On the weekends, I'm home myself. So it's $250 a week. It's $1,000 a month, basically. Let's just say you had $1,000 a month extra, just that little. And Monique was like, where do I find that person right next to me that gives me $50 every time I go over there? It's just an example. But if you had those $1,000, how does that really relate to discipline? And the thing about it is, oftentimes, and we discussed this to some extent, and I'm giving a little bit, and that's why I said this is a little bit of a different video. There are a bunch of things that have to do with philosophy. Right, so I believe personally that one of the sad stories and the sad things that I've seen living in the United States now for more than 25 years is that there has been a growing aspect of consumerism. The media, the news, the people we know, our colleagues, literally celebrate when we can describe things that we consume. And it's not only that we allow ourselves a nice trip on vacation, or that we allow ourselves to go to a restaurant when the pandemic stuff is over again, or that we allow ourselves some new clothing, all of which is consumption. But it's also that we, for example, make the decision that we want to get more education, like for example a graduate degree, and that we accept that to get that, we are willing to take on debt, which means we have to come up with more money so we can afford the degree, rather than saying, I first have to have the money and then I go for the degree. In a sense, the same thing is true with cars. Right? I'm oftentimes comparing that, and I know it's not a completely one-for-one comparison, but in our out-of-state turnkey strategy, we typically say to get to that 1% performance that we're looking for, the properties are going to cost anywhere between $80,000 and $150,000. And depending on what kind of car, if you want to have a big truck, or you want to have like a Tesla Model S, or you want to have a nice sedan or stuff like that, $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 is not that unheard of anymore. So the one thing is an asset that will be with you for a long time, but the other thing is something that loses value pretty much when you drive it off the lot. And most people don't have those $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000. So what do? They get a loan, right? And why does that relate to these extra $1,000 that you get from the neighbor that pays you $50 every time you go over to look after the place? Because the temptation and what we are celebrating is oh look, somebody got a new car. Oh look, they got a new boat. Oh look, they got a new skido. Oh look, they got new clothing. Oh look, they threw a big party. Oh look, they got themselves this toy and that toy. And most of these things are bought with credit or with loans. They are consumption. And if somebody were to give you $1,000 extra for looking after the house next door, how tempted would you be to use it to consume more? And you might even go as far as saying, wow, with $1,000, not just I could buy myself something for $1,000 every month, but I could get myself a loan for which I can pay $1,000 extra every month. And it feels like it doesn't even come out of your pocket because your neighbor is paying it, right? So that's part of discipline, is if you had extra money through a circumstance like just described, would you be disciplined enough to put it aside so that you can add it in your accumulation account to quicker be able to buy the next house? And that same discipline, even if there is no a neighbor that pays you $50 for every visit, is how disciplined are you to actually put your own money that you bring in, or part of that, into your accumulation account really literally every month, so it can accumulate and ultimately get you to about $20,000 that you need to buy the first house, and another 20 for the second, and another 20 for the third. That is another form of discipline. And there's a huge temptation, not so much when you put the first few months in and it's 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, but when it gets to 15, 16, 18, to leave it there and add another 1,000, another 1,000, another 1,000, and now it's 20 or 21 and you can actually do the purchase. That requires discipline. And even more so when you get to the point of, okay, now I bought the first house, now I can relax. And you forget that to get to your time freedom point, you need 10 or maybe 9, but not 1. Right? So that's one aspect. It's the discipline that you need to have. Now, the other thing I mentioned was patience. And this is another one of those philosophical things that we need to ask ourselves, how does that fit into our daily life? And what I'm finding, and I'm sure you have found that too, and Monique said, so I think I can be patient. I say, well, tell me, what do you think when you say, I think I can be patient? Well, I needed to wait for quite a while until I could, for example, buy myself one of those things that I really like a piece of clothing or my new car or anything like that. And I said, yeah, that's great. And I agree. And that is actually a good sign if you can do that. Because a lot of people, and that's the other part, the societal, cultural part that I think is important, is do you have patience after you figured out where your time freedom point is to really patiently be disciplined to get there? So if we go with our $4,000 plus a month and we have $400 per house and we know it takes us 12 to 15 years to get there, are we patient enough to say that goal is still exciting me, is still energizing me, is still on my mind, is still making me put money aside every month because I want to get that to that point of freedom? And 12 to 15 years is a lot of patience, and I'm saying this is even harder and has gotten harder year after year after year because our environment again conditions us not to have patience. Right? If you don't want to sit down and wait for the cook to cook you a meal, what do? You go through a drive-thru. And if you don't even want to drive there anymore, right? Because you don't have the patience to stay in line and wait until all the cars ahead of you made room so that you can actually get to the ordering thing and order your meal, now what do? COVID times have taught us that. You go on the website and order the meal with all the fixings and stuff online and have it delivered. So you can do 99 other things without any patience. And then when the doorbell rings and the meal comes, you sit down and you cough it down as fast as you can. And 10 minutes, 15 minutes later, you say, okay, I had my dinner, I can go on to the next thing. And the next thing might be something that ding-donged on your WhatsApp or your Google or your Facebook or your Instagram or your LinkedIn or any other social media. Or you watch a YouTube video or you go to your favorite show, and on and on and on. We have less and less patience. Everything has to be there right away. I challenge you, by the way, if you don't quite believe it, if you say, oh, it's not that bad. I said to Monique, it's a lot of times pretty hard to completely agree or really connect to something if we don't have our own experience. So like I have, for example, kept the cell phones that I had in the past. So I still have an old iPhone 4 that I'm every once in a while use as to wake me up like a alarm bell kind of clock. But what you can do, even though it doesn't have a contract or anything like that anymore, you can, because it has Wi-Fi, you can connect it to your Wi-Fi. And then try to do anything. Try to find any kind of your favorite websites. It probably still has Facebook and your account on it and stuff like that. Just do that. And you will find out it's so freaking slow that you will get super impatient. You will say, how the hell did I ever have the patience to wait for this thing being that slow? And then think back how long it's been when you used that iPhone 4 or whatever other device it was just a few years ago. Same thing, if you still have it, take an old laptop, connect it, hook it up to Wi-Fi, and see how long it takes just to get to a YouTube video or to open any website. And you will be amazed how patient you obviously were or how impatient you are now. And we're talking seconds to minutes on that stuff. And now we're talking years and maybe a decade to get to the time freedom point. So that's why you have to have the discipline to put the money aside and take advantage of any additional money that can come in. And you have to have the patience to see that it's worth it. The goal of getting to your time freedom point is worth it to be patient and consistently do it. And Monique was like, wow, I never really thought about that. And I mean, she said to me, I definitely have to dig out my own phone and really try that because, it's just not something that you normally do. Okay, yeah, the other thing is, so we talked about all of this and then Monique says to me, okay, I get it, but what do I do about it? How so you can see we were way beyond just the pre-interview for a podcast. So she says, so I get it and it's kind of interesting, but what do you tell your coaching and mentoring clients how to go about it? What do you do? Now you need to be disciplined, you need to be patient, you need to have the perseverance to keep doing the same thing or even increase the amount of money if you can. And then how do you go about it? And I told her two things. The one thing when it comes to the discipline and the patience is to not so much make everything dependent on your own actions when you can automate certain things. And you remember at the beginning of this video, I talked about one of the components of the 3 components, also structure and systems. For example, one of the structured systems that you can do is download an app that keeps track of all your expenses, what goes in and out of your bank accounts, in and out of your credit cards. Whenever you spend money, it tracks it and so forth. So you can literally see what is the balance, or I call that your personal balance sheet of your incoming and outgoing money. In the context of that, you can also establish payments, automatic payments, and I'm a big fan of what's called the 10% rule, where 10% of the money that comes in from your job, from your exchanging time for money, before you do anything else, goes into your accumulation account automatically. So it's not that you need to be physically, personally disciplined to go online and actually make that transfer every month. You can automate it, and the benefit is it works a little bit like a habit. If you automate, if you put that structure in place, because for many of our habits, the super big benefit is it doesn't take a lot of our energy because it's automatic, right? Like, let me give you a quick example. I said to Monique, so what happens if you every day go to bed at, let's say, 11 p.m. at night, and you set an alarm for 6:30 in the morning? What happens if you do this? And she was like, I don't know what you mean. I said, well, imagine that. You do this like weekday, weekend, over and over and over. And I actually, by the way, for you guys, if you want to try it, I challenge you to try it. It's kind of actually a little bit freakish, but it's also interesting. If you do this, same time to bed, lights out really in bed at 11, and you set your alarm at 6:30, and you do this disciplined for, I would say, probably less than 30 days, but let's say 30 days, you will find that you will probably wake up about a minute or so before the alarm bell rings. And you can, when you see this, when that happened a few times in a row, you can actually not set the alarm, and you will see your body will have developed the habit to know this is the time when he or she, like in Dominique's case, when Dominique wanted to wake up. And you wake up automatically because the brain has understood this is the habit, this is the rhythm that we want to do now. We go to bed at this time, and you will also actually feel the urge in the evening that it's getting closer to closer to 11. If you have a bunch of stuff going on, your body will start telling you, hey man, it's time to go to bed. And then you go to bed on time. It's important to always the exact same time, and you will wake up without an alarm. That's a habit, right? And so if you set up in your bank account automatically, whenever your paycheck comes in, to automatically take the first 10% and put it in your accumulation account, it is way less energy to have that automatically happen, and you never even see the money other than when the statement for your accumulation account comes in, than having to physically do it. Because it's not the act. You can click around. That doesn't take a lot of energy. It's the mental energy to say, oh yeah, okay, that $2,000 or $1,500 or however much it is going into this account again. And you see it because you type it in and all that stuff. If you automate it, it's much easier. So back to the question of habits and how do you actually get these things all organized so that they can really work and that you can really reach that time freedom point. And what I said to Monique is it has a lot to do with your mindset. And the vast majority, and that's the third philosophical thing that we kind of touched on in that pre-podcast interview, is that a lot of people, oftentimes with good reason, see themselves in a victim situation. They are a victim of COVID. They are a victim of the economy. They are a victim of what their employers does or doesn't allow them to do, whether it's having to go to work or having to work from home even if you don't have any space, whether you are required to have a vehicle to get to work that you have to come up with, but you can't really afford it, so you had to put it on a loan, and now you're paying a car loan, and nobody cares that you've been sitting at home for a year and probably for another 3 to 6 months and don't even have to use it, but you pay for it every month, right? So those kind of things, and a lot of things, and there's many more. And Monique actually started, like in this one and this one, and it was kind of very easy to find out what are we all victims of. And what I'm trying to instill in the people that we work with or I work with is to say, okay, yeah, you can learn the strategy that we have, this out-of-state turnkey residential real estate investing strategy, and we made videos about it, and you can watch them. But the point that really makes it work and really allows you to get to that time freedom point is the ability to get yourself out of this victim mindset and turn yourself into a creator mindset. And somebody who wants to create their future. And I challenged Monique. I said, okay, tell me the things that you do where you are creating your future, your next day, your next week, your next month. What are you doing that creates a different outcome than the one that you don't like? Right? And one of the different outcomes is, okay, if you never had any kind of real estate investment, you never had anything that pays you, never had that neighbor that paid you $50 to come over and look after the house every day, then making these changes, creating this accumulation account, putting in the structure to put the 10% away when the money comes in, and then disciplined enough to buy these properties from good turnkey providers and making sure that your structure includes for these properties to perform well, so they actually give you those $200, $300, $400 a month, then you set yourself up to success and actually have the ability to reach that time freedom point. Now, towards the end, Monique asked me, okay, that all sounds super good, and I can totally follow, and I can imagine that a lot of people would like your help to actually keep them on track and encourage them to set up all the stuff properly. But then, are you doing this all by yourself? And the last thing in this kind of, like I said, unusual video is I said, Monique, you will probably be surprised, but most people would assume that it takes a village, right? We have this saying, it takes a village to do fill in the blanks. And in my experience, it doesn't take a village. So if you say this idea of getting to the time freedom point where I no longer have to exchange time for money and I have enough passive income from my investments coming in every month, and not only that, but I will also at some point probably no longer be around, I'm getting old, I'm leaving the planet, and then turn over what I accumulated, the properties that pay every month, to my spouse or to my kids and so forth. What does it take? Or the better question is actually, who does it take? I say, Monique, it's round about a handful of people or organizations, depending on how you look at it. So what do I have? And what I'm actually introducing people, and for anybody who watches this video or sends this video to any of your friends, that's how I do it and what I invite you to if you like my help, and I'm happy to refer you and introduce you to my tribe, to my group of people. It's not a village, it's really just a small group. So the first thing is I have right now 3 and hopefully soon 4 different turnkey providers in different areas around the country where you can find well-performing properties. And if you go again back to other videos that we have done, I explain what are the criteria to select a turnkey provider. Like, how does this company need to operate and what are the things that they need to do. But when you take those criteria, it's not that you need to find a new one all the time. You rather want to have maybe 3, maybe 4. And why? Because then as you keep buying properties, you have 2 here and 3 there. Then you have 3 there and 5 there. Then you have 5 there and 6 there. And the more you have with the same provider, the deeper your relationship gets, the deeper the trust gets, the deeper and easier they know what you're looking for. They know how you tick. They can anticipate how should they look for you. How should the next property look like? What kind of a tenant should go in your property? What are the things that are important to you? Like for me, I'm telling my turnkeys, if possible now, going forward, I want to find 4-bedroom, 2-bath houses because I want to be able to offer a dedicated room, basically a bedroom converted into an office that can be dedicated to work, because I believe more and more people will continue to work from home even if COVID is over at some point. Now, will we find them all the time? Probably not, but if we have the choice, that would be a great thing. So you have to have, as one of the group of connections and relationships you need, a few good turnkey providers. We have 3, I'm working on a 4th one, and I don't think we will add any more than that. The next thing you need is a good lender, and I recommend to have a lender that operates nationwide so that it doesn't matter where your properties are, right? If you have 3 or 4 turnkey providers and they are in different locations like in Illinois, in Idaho, in Chicago, in Alabama, in Tennessee and whatever, one lender that covers all of it. The benefit there is you don't have to follow all the different rules, and every bank has different forms and stuff like that. And the more you work with your lender, you have your first property and then the second, third, fourth and so forth as you're working to get your 10, 11, 12, they get to know you better and better. They know all the stuff you have. You basically constantly pre-qualify, and it's a personal relationship, and that's always the big benefit. When they know you, when you have trust, right? So that's the second relationship kind of group. The third one is insurance, and that might surprise a lot of people, but there's a huge difference on how much you need to pay for insurance. And when I say I have houses that pay me $400 a month, and other people say, well, I have the same kind of houses and I only get $250 or $300, how do you do it? Well, one of the big differences is how much per month do you pay in insurance? And if you have $1,000 or $2,500 deductible, it's way more expensive every month and every year than me with $5,000. But there aren't that many providers out there. So again, you need to find one, which I happen to be happy and lucky to have one, and then keep that relationship. All my 10 properties and all the ones I'm buying now are insured by the same organization. So I have one insurance, one lender. And then there are 2 more that come a little later, not necessarily with the first and second property, but with a few more properties. And that is a good CPA. After you have the first or second property, you want to have a really good CPA, because there are a lot of rules on the one hand to do your taxes. But what's more important is the government is having a lot of incentives and programs for real estate investors that a good CPA would apply to your tax return and let you take advantage of. And Monique said, what? Why would the government actually have particular things for real estate investors? And so we touched on something that is also on my website. It's called Maslow's pyramid of hierarchy. And what that means is Maslow was a psychologist, and he basically looked at the human condition, at human beings, and said, okay, what do we need? And how do we get from one thing, fundamental things we need, to things that we would ultimately like to acquire? So the top piece of that pyramid of or hierarchy of need is what's called self-fulfillment. When all the things that you could ever imagine you need to sustain yourself, your family, your housing, and all those kind of things are taken care of, and you can, for example, say, okay, I go to a place where I can be quiet by myself to come up with a new philosophy or write a book, and you're fulfilling yourself and your abilities and your dreams. But you can only do this when all the other things in the hierarchy are fulfilled. And so if you go to the other side, I said, Monique, what do you think is on the other side of that hierarchy? Where does it start? What are the fundamentals? And she said, oh, I know, it's food. And yeah, exactly. There's actually 3 things. The fundamental lowest level on that hierarchy is food, safety, and shelter. And if you think about it, who can actually provide shelter to the public? It's either people who privately use their money to provide shelter in the form of houses and apartments and so forth, or the government, right? And so if the choice is either the government has to do it themselves or they can find people who do it, it makes sense to get incentives for that. One of the incentives is that if you buy a house, in the following 27 and a half years, you can depreciate that house. So if you have a $100,000 house, every year you can write off $3,000 of the value of that house for 27 and a half years, almost 30 years. So it is looked at, that house, as if you bought a machine to run a business. Because everybody knows in 27 or 30 years, that machine is pretty much worthless. So every year it loses a little bit of value, and purely on the books, that's also true for your investment in a house. So that's an incentive that the government gives to you as an investor, because it says you helping us to provide shelter to the public. And Monique was like, oh, wow, I never really thought about it that way. Yes, you are basically providing a public service. And even more so if you follow our strategy, because our turnkey properties, they are called turnkey for part of the reason is they get fully renovated. And I said that to Monique too, what we really want to create is a win-win-win situation. So I like that the turnkey provider wins by finding the property, renovating it, and putting up for a certain price, let's say for $100,000, and they carried all the risk. And Then the property gets appraised. And let's say it appraises for $105,000. Then they took the risk for good cause and they should make a little profit. So they win on that. They also win because if they do a good job and it appraises well, then they also get to manage it. And if it's done well, then management is easy. Nothing breaks. So they only collect the management fee. So that's their win. Now look at the tenant. If we apply, and we have another video that says how we actually vetting tenants and what we ask our turnkey providers to do to find the right tenant. But let's assume we have the right tenant. That tenant wins too. They get the key into a house at a reasonable rent. Let's say we bought the house for $100,000. They rent a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house with a garden and garage and everything for $1,000 a month. But they get basically a new house. New carpets, new kitchen, new bathrooms, new light fixtures, new electric, new plumbing, new water heater, new furnace, sometimes even a new roof. It smells like a brand new house for $1,000 a month. So that's a great value. And what we're hoping is, I'm hoping this, and I think if you give them good value, then there is a reasonable hope that they see that house as their home. And if they do, then they treat it like their home. They don't destroy it. They give a call when something doesn't work, which is rare. And otherwise, they treat it like a home, as if it were their own. And number 3, the third win is us as investors, because we get a well-performing property from a company that actually renovated it, so it knows it inside out and now is managing it. And we get our $400 or $200 or $300 a month after we paid the mortgage, the insurance, the property taxes, and the property management, and even put a little bit money aside for eventualities. So the property turnkey provider wins, the tenant wins, we win. And we're providing a social service. So that's why that additional category of CPA is important. And then when you go all the way to the end of that big picture, we reach our time freedom point. Here we are now. We're getting our $4,300, $4,500, $4,800 a month out of our 10 properties. Then there comes a point where you have to think about, okay, how much do I still want to be involved myself? And what do I do if I'm no longer around? And that is where you need an estate attorney. You know, I always think it's probably the right time when you're getting close to your time freedom point to get an estate attorney who helps you to set up a trust where you determine what happens to these properties. Can they ever be sold or not, or under which circumstance? Who is managing the whole thing? Who are we working with? And what happens when I'm no longer around? I can say my wife wouldn't want to manage all of this, and my daughter would love to have that income, but she probably wouldn't want to manage it all either. So it needs to be set up in a trust well before you actually leave the planet, so it can keep running. But the beauty is, and I said to Monique, imagine how nice it is to know that you built all of this kind of legacy, and then in the trust it's assured that as long as you're around, you never have to worry not to be able to pay your bills. If you leave, your spouse doesn't have to worry because that money keeps coming, and when he or she leaves, your kids can have it. And if you want to, if there are no kids, you can give it to a charity and they still have to follow the rules of the trust. So it's basically the turnkey providers, insurance, the CPA, the estate management organization, and your lender. And that's it. That's the whole group. It's not a village. So we basically really had a great conversation. I think we will do a little more than just a podcast as we had originally intended. Maybe it turns into a webinar or some other class or some other program with that particular organization. But what was cool is that Monique said at the end, you know, I have heard a lot of relatively critical things about Turnkey, of being too expensive, or we don't really know anybody who gets it done, right? They may buy a first house and then it kind of peters out. And that's where we come back to the beginning to say that's why discipline, that's why structure, that's why perseverance and patience are so important. But if you have them, or if you're willing to have somebody like us to help you, then you can get there too. You can get to that time freedom point. And Monique's final statement before we close was, oh man, I want that too. I really need to look into it more. And then so ultimately I sent her the link to our YouTube channel. And that gets me to the point, if you're not already a subscriber, I would like to ask you to subscribe. If you liked what you heard, please give it a thumbs up. ring the little notification bell so that you get notified when we come up with new videos. We have a short one explaining terminology on Wednesdays, and then longer ones like this one, even though this is extra long, but this one on Fridays. And I would love your comments. Also, please let us know what other kind of topics you like to hear about, because I'm happy to do whatever topics the audience is interested in. And the last thing I like to ask you, kind of like a wish, is I'm sure that especially these kind of episodes where we just freely, openly talk to somebody, or I'm basically telling how this interview and how this story actually went with Monique, I'm sure there are a lot of other people who think, okay, what does it take? How do I get to a point where I no longer have to work? How can I ever, as a normal person, generate enough income so I don't have to work anymore? I'm sure there are lots of people out there like that. So if you want to do them a service or solid, like some people say, share the video. Invite them to watch this video and others, because we do this because we want to educate. I love to help people. And if anybody wants to, go to our website or through the channel and just contact me, and I'm happy to have a conversation. So that was the story of my conversation with Monique. 8 minutes on Are We Good for Podcast, and about 30 minutes on all the other stuff that you now know about as well. So thanks for listening, and be well, stay safe, and I talk to you next time.